Who is the biggest troll in history? Theodore Hook, the perpetrator of the Berners Street hoax in London in 1810, in which Cook sent thousands of letters summoning all manners of various vendors and service people and physicians and dignitaries and others to all come to one random person's home, literally shutting down a large part of London as they all descended upon the same address throughout the day, all while Cook and a friend sat watching from a house across the street, presumably laughing their ass off the whole time. This Chinese general, whose city was besieged by a much larger army, so he opened the main gate and sat atop it playing his lute. The enemy thought it was a trap, so they packed their stuff and left. Xu Liang, magnificent bastard, was so feared as a strategist and tactician. He was allegedly carried onto the battlefield posthumously, and the opposing army, despite knowing he was already dead, decided they couldn't take the chance he had some sneakish in the works for them. I forget the name, but that one guy from the 1800s who bought specific tickets to a play and then gave them away to bald men on the street, so that when everyone took their seats and the bald men's heads reflected the light from the stage, they spelled out F as seen from the stage. Please tell me you have a source on this. His name was Horace de Vere Cole. Other pranks attributed to him included walking around the streets of London with a cow's udder poking through the fly of his trousers, and cutting it off with a pair of scissors when he judged he had caused maximum outrage, depositing a load of horse manure in Venice's Piazza San Marco, which cannot be reached by horses. He was in Venice for his honeymoon at the time, hosting a lavish party at which the attendees eventually realized that all their surnames contained the word bottom. Some sources state that the theater prank actually spelled out bollocks, and it's possible he may have done it more than once. Eric the Red. He wanted people to come and live in his newfound ice-covered land, so he named it Greenland. Diogenes. He became notorious for his philosophical stunts, such as carrying a lamp during the day, claiming to be looking for an honest man. He criticized Plato, disputed his interpretation of Socrates, and sabotaged his lectures, sometimes distracting listeners by bringing food and eating during the discussions. Diogenes was also noted for having mocked Alexander the Great, both in public and to his face, when he visited Corinth in 336 BC. The Moth-Fair, who sold the Eiffel Tower twice. There was a Prussian, I can't remember his name, who managed to make her officer uniform out of scraps of clothing. He used it to convince a few guards on patrol to follow him into a government building, ordered the arrest of the man in charge, confiscated all the money personally, sent the arrested man to Berlin, claiming it was all on order of the king. He then ditched the uniforms, got on a train to Berlin and managed to beat the guards there. He then sat back and watched the absolute confusion happen. The guy was eventually arrested, but the public turned him into a celebrity and his actions into a play that was performed all over Germany. He wasn't incarcerated for long, and after his release he lived an easy life from there on. The Kaiser even was proud for this to happen because it showed how much the people trusted the authorities. Mozart didn't like this singer so much that he wrote a piece for her with high and low notes constantly, because he noticed that when she hit low notes her chin went to her chest, and when she hit high notes her head would fling back, so it was like she was bobbing like a chicken. Classic composers had good sense of humor. Mozart's contemporary Joseph Haydn was conductor under a noble for a long time, but his employer never gave Haydn and his orchestra vacation, so as a sign of protest he made this symphony in which orchestra members leave mid-song section by section. The guy who opened a fake No One restaurant in London using Google reviews and his back garden and shared with microwave meals. That was incredible. He also faked his way into Paris fashion show as a designer with knockoff clothes. Then whenever people around the world want to interview him about these things, he sends lookalikes instead. It must be quite exhausting knowing him. April Fool's Day 1974, when a man burned 70 rubber tires on a dormant volcano in Alaska. This has to be up there. He waited 3 years to get a helicopter to fly the tires to the top to get a picture perfect condition. He even got the Coast Guard called out too, and here's the link to the story. I was thinking more like the mortician who patented the automatic telephone switch 3 years after finding out his rival's wife worked as a telephone operator and would reroute calls asking for his funeral parlor to her husband's. The guy put a whole worldwide workforce out of work for one person's actions. The dude who somehow got a network news program to say that a plane that crashed was piloted by 4 men with the names Holy fuck, something Wong, We Too Low, Bang Ding Ow. The guy who decided to put an ice troll 3-stroke for the way up the path to High Hrothgar. I think it's a great introduction to how you should always be quick saving. Stephen Hawking was in an interview when a cord was unplugged and alarm went off. This was before he was completely immobile, and he slumped in his chair. The people interviewing him were scared out of their minds until they realized that he was alright and chuckling at his joke. The cord and alarm were for a computer, not to mention the meme about the multiverse where the interviewer asked if there was a world where he was smarter than Hawking. Hawking said yes, and one where you're funny. Orson Welles did a radio play that told people the Martians were invading. The next day he told everyone that his play had freaked out millions of people, when it was a few dozen at most. Michelangelo, without a doubt. This man was hired to paint a chapel and put more dicks and AS on it than you ever did see. Didn't George R.R. Martin once say that in the future he would love to get people so immersed in a fantasy world novel and never finish it? The old Tim Enoch newspaper The Sunimo, in the 19th century, they published some articles about the presence of life on the moon like unicorns, winged humans, and other creatures who built temples and lived peacefully. This caused a massive moon craze until it was later outed as fake. Marcel Duchamp, who, among other fun things, submitted a urinal as an art piece to the Society of Independent Artists under a pseudonym, and then was part of the board that was set to approve pieces. He also spread rumors of another piece he was working on so people wouldn't suspect anything. Love that dude. Plus he sparked an interesting discussion in art. Technically this isn't a troll since it was serving a purpose, but Admiral Nelson was escaping a French fleet when a man fell overboard. It was Nelson's policy of never leaving anyone behind, so he turned his ship around to go pick him up. The French saw his ship turn back toward them, assumed he had reinforcements coming beyond the horizon, so they turned and ran. In China there was the War of the Three Kingdoms. The Wei, Shu, and Wu. Two of their armies met in battle and the smaller was out of arrows. They were separated by a river. One night, the leader of the smaller army stocked the front of their boats' rafts with straw bales and moved toward the opposing army over the river. They were immediately hailed with arrows. The men ducked behind the straw while the arrows stuck in the straw. Undamaged, they then sailed away and yelled, "We thank you for the arrows. We will return them shortly." This may just be a tall tale from Romance of the Three Kingdoms, but it may be true. In the 30s-40s BBC did an April Fool's broadcast where they told people how spaghetti was made, on trees. They literally showed fake spaghetti trees, and since not many people in that time knew how spaghetti was made, lots of people believed it. Theodore Roosevelt, he got shot, went on a 1-hour speech mocking his assassin and then went to hospital. Gillis Corey, a farmer caught up in the Salem witch trials. He was sentenced to pressing, being slowly crushed by stones, to force him to make a plea. Every time he was questioned, he simply said more weight. He died without making a plea. If he pled innocent, they would have convicted him anyway and taken his property from his family. If he pled guilty, they would have convicted him and taken his property from his family. If you don't enter a plea, the court at the time could not exercise jurisdiction over you. That's why courts occasionally tortured people into making a plea. Since he didn't enter a plea, the court couldn't take all his The prophet Elijah heckled the priests of Baal because their god would not set fire to their sacrifice. Ike. The Bible says the priests of Baal prayed all day while Elijah heckled them. This will be buried, but Sergei Korolev, the dude was getting frustrated with the Soviet government because they weren't interested in funding his space exploration projects. So he got his propaganda group to publish articles about how Russia was getting close to sending something into space. As expected, the US took the bait and started working on their satellite program, and the Soviet government freaked out when they saw the US doing that, so they funded Korolev's projects. He and his group played them good. Gregor Mcgregor, he was a Scotsman who claimed to own land in the New World. He got fake maps printed, fake pictures drawn, then published it all in a big convincing book. He then got over 200 people to emigrate to this paradise and, get this, dropped them in the Central American jungle. Many died. Some returned and blamed the expedition guide for directing them to the wrong location. Still believing Gregor's story, the more you read, the crazier it gets. Russians, and how they continuously retreated when Napoleon tried to attack them. resulting in giving up due to the situations his army was facing, like disease. Leonardo da Vinci. He made almost no actual contributions to science. Everything he discovered and documented in his journals could not be read as they were encoded and mirrored. Much of what he discovered had been rediscovered by the time the books were decoded. Basil Zaharov, a Greek arms dealer. He once donated a submarine to the Greek government. He then told the Turks that the Greeks had a submarine and sold them two submarines. Lastly, he went to the Russians and told them the Turks had two submarines, so he sold them two as well. None of the submarines actually worked. Steve Wilhite. He invented the GIF. Then he won a Webby Award for it. Webby Award speeches are only allowed to be 5 words long. He went up and said it's pronounced GIF, not GIF.